What was the most unexpected twist you came across in a case? Another one from Forensic Files, weirdest one in my opinion. Husband and wife attacked with an axe while in bed. In the morning, husband gets up, goes to get the paper, gets locked out, finds extra key, goes back in and passes out and dies. Cops trying to figure out all of the bloody footprints. The basic action part of his brain wasn't harmed in the axe attack, so he went about his normal day while bleeding after an axe to the head. So freaky. Turns out it was their son that did it. Mother recovered and doesn't remember anything, so stands by the son. I remember reading about a case where a guy gave a hitchhiker a ride, but made him get out of the car because the guy was belligerent or something and was creeping him out. The hitchhiker went to the other guy's house and killed his mom. Mark Kilroy's case had a lot of twists and turns. It's not at all how I thought the story would turn out. Texas college student goes missing in Mexico on spring break, was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by a cult that believed human sacrifice gave them magic powers. The investigation leads to the discovery of 15 more bodies. Cult members flee and an international manhunt ensues, ending in a massive shootout with police. Oh God, what was the case where a dentist or doctor was raping his patients while they were knocked out for surgeries, and when police took blood samples, it was eventually revealed he had implanted a cadaver vein in his arm and was putting someone else's blood inside it and then taking the samples himself from that instead of his own blood? Please tell me somebody else knows what I'm talking about. It's some straight up insane, creepy shit. My answer is always going to be the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case until another case comes around that's somehow insane enough to top it. Watching that one unfold in real time was surreal. Up until Gypsy was found, everyone believed that she was this chronically ill, wheelchair-bound teenager who'd been abducted by her mother's killer. There was literally no reason to suspect otherwise. If you had suggested that Gypsy was actually a grown woman in her 20s, that her mother was an abusive scam artist who'd been forcing her to pretend to be sick and actually making her sick for almost her whole life, that she could actually walk, that she was the one who wrote the terrifying Facebook posts purportedly from her abductor, and that she and her secret boyfriend came up with this plot to kill her mother and run away, people would have called you a nutcase who needs to lay off the detective movies. When Paulette Gabarra-Farah went missing from her bedroom but was later found in her own bed, wedged between the mattress and bed frame, family members had been sleeping in the bed during the search, and the girl's nanny had made the bed several times since she disappeared. The murder of Jessica Lunsford. She was a little girl who went missing in her home that she shared with her father and grandparents. All signs pointed to the family killing her. All three were given lie detector tests and all three failed. Everyone was convinced that they did it, and the neighbor confessed to kidnapping her and molesting her. And then the worst part, he buried her alive. Piece of shit. Lisa Theris. She was out with a couple of men who either robbed or planned to rob a rural property in Alabama. She apparently hopped out of the truck and ran into the woods. The men ended up being questioned by police and admitted to shooting Lisa in the head and dumping her body. After a month, Lisa emerged from the woods, 50 pounds lighter, naked, and covered in scratches and filthy. Turns out they'd been doing meth, and she spent 30 days lost in the woods while the guys convinced themselves they had killed her. Crazy stuff. The John List piece of garbage. He got fired from his job and accumulated a lot of debt. He pretended to go to work every day. Eventually, he decided his family was better off dead than poor. He killed the entire household, live-in mother, wife, and children, then fled the home and started a new life. It took weeks for the bodies to be found because he told schools and everyone that they were going on a vacation. It wasn't until lights started burning out in their house that people started suspecting things. He was eventually found decades later under a new name. Someone turned him in after seeing his age-progressed bust on America's Most Wanted. Plot twist. The home had a Tiffany skylight that was worth more than the debt they had incurred. I was fairly surprised that Brian Wells was eventually named as a participant in the bank robbery. I know his family vehemently denies he was, but after seeing Evil Genius, I think the FBI got it right. Despite being involved, I don't think he was a bad guy, and certainly didn't deserve to be blown up. He was just sort of hapless but decent dude making the best of what he had but was clearly a bad judge of character. Marjorie Diehl Armstrong was clearly a psychopath. Listening to her ramble on was maddening, and I don't know if this really qualifies as a case, but I was surprised when Brittany Murphy's shady husband died of the exact same thing she died of less than 6 months later. I don't believe he or her mother murdered her, or that he was murdered, but I believe the three of them all contributed to each other's paranoia and mental issues, which eventually led to Brittany's easily preventable death. Currently, the most unexpected twist might be Fody Dulot killing himself while about to go on trial over his missing wife Jennifer Dulot. He left a bizarre letter saying he's innocent and had nothing to do with it, while also saying a bunch of other people had nothing to do with it, as if he'd known that if he had nothing to do with it. A crime that comes to mind for me didn't involve a murder, but what happened was truly a crime, a sad one. This crime practically played out in my own backyard, and not only did I know some of the people involved, I'd also worked at the hospital in this drama. I won't name names, but my sister is related by marriage to one of the main persons in this sad tale. This drama began playing out in the late 80s in my small town. Then it went national, all over the US. All news outlets covered the story, with each suit brought in court. It turned into a huge story at the time. It was on news shows like Barbara Walters' 2020, The Today Show, Good Morning America. A movie was even made. It's the two girls who were intentionally switched at birth in the hospital, Kimberly Mays and Arlena Twigg. The Mays had been through so much to be able to have a baby. The Twiggs already had a bunch of kids when Kimberly Arlena was born, but the Mays baby was born with a heart condition while the Twigg baby was healthy. The doctor and his conspirators switched the babies, so the Mays had a healthy baby. During testing for Arlena's heart surgery when she was 9 years old, the Twiggs were told it was impossible that Arlena was their biological baby. Arlena died at the age of 9, and Kimberly Mays' mom died when Kimberly was 2 years old due to ovarian cancer. Through the process of elimination and the courts, the Twiggs found their biological daughter, Kimberly Mays. Custody battles and confusion ensued. Kimberly lived with her dad, Robert, and with the Twiggs too. Kimberly's life was very messed up. It wasn't a happy life. There are allegations that Robert Mays was very abusive to Kimberly, physically and emotionally. That's according to Kimberly's assorted stepmom and Robert's girlfriend. Today, Kimberly has a bunch of kids. She's worked as a stripper, been married and divorced, and she's now 41. The Twiggs are divorced and Robert Mays is dead. I 100% believe the switch was premeditated. It's always bothered me that the doctor, nor the nurses or nurses' aides who had been accused of instigating and carrying out this crime that affected so many lives were never held accountable for the crime. Well, this is solved now, but that Chris Watts killed his children in the oil field and not at home like most had believed. This even threw the FBI for a shock when he revealed it during his prison interview. You're so right with truth is stranger than fiction. I find most cases that are not easily solved are because something happened that no one would ever expect. For instance, there's a missing person right now who died from a methodical serial killer who travels the country, and his name is Israel Keys. Additionally, there's also a family who thinks their loved one died in some type of accident, but it was actually serial killer Israel Keys. Perhaps the murder of Taya Rada, as documented in Shadow of Truth. I don't want to give too much away, but each episode they raise a new possibility even crazier, but just as likely as the last. Personally, I think the final scenario is probably the correct one. Also, the case of Vicky Morgan. She was having an affair with an extremely wealthy man who would force her to watch as he performed BDSM acts on prostitutes. He was an heir to the Bloomingdale fortune. His wife then found out about the affair and ordered him to end it, which he did. After this happened, Vicky spiraled into a pit of depression and poverty, which forced her into prostitution and drug abuse. A few years later, the man died, but before he passed, he assured her she would be well cared for. Growing worried that she would be left with nothing, she hired a lawyer to file an $11 million lawsuit for compensation as his mistress. When I first started reading this article, I assumed it would be the rich man or his wife who murdered her, but it was actually a friend of hers from rehab she invited to live with her due to financial woes. Although they weren't intimate sexually, I believe he was gay, he grew increasingly jealous and possessive of her and didn't approve of her relationships with other men. It seems as though he also recently learned he had contracted HIV and was terminally ill. On top of dying, he was also addicted to cocaine. On the evening of July 7, 1983, less than 11 months after Bloomingdale's death, he walked into a police station and confessed to murdering Morgan in their apartment. Police found Morgan's body, apparently beaten to death with a baseball bat. He was sentenced to 26 years to life and died in 1991 in Chino, California, while undergoing treatment for AIDS-related illnesses. The Superbike murders was South Carolina's most infamous cold case for a long time. 4 people murdered at a motorcycle shop in broad daylight, execution style. No money taken. I can still remember when it was a cold case. It was creepy as hell. The police thought the wife of the owner had something to do with it. They did a DNA test on a dirty diaper she left in the trash at the station, which showed that another guy who worked in the shop, who had also been killed, was the father of her baby. She was adamant they were wrong. They tested it again, same results. She got an attorney. They ran the test a 3rd time against the guy's mom, which showed she wasn't the mother, which of course is impossible. They had mislabeled the samples. This was an 18-month saga. Anyway, the case was cold for 13 years, I think. Then boom, one day it was solved. A serial killer, Todd Kohlhepp, who ran his own successful real estate company, confessed. I'm still like, WTF to this day. In a similar vein to the OP, the Nancy McEwen case in Brooklyn in the late 1960s. TLDR. Woman driving on the Belt Parkway, near the ocean for those of you not familiar with it, one morning is suddenly shot from out of the blue, runs off the road, off-duty cop gets her to the hospital where she dies from the wound, which is only found on the operating table. Albert Seidman, who had already supervised the Kitty Genovese case investigation the year before, was in charge, and detectives on the case interview hundreds of witnesses. Eventually, he figures out that the bullet probably ricocheted from something in the water, and finds the guy who was out in his boat target shooting that morning. Case closed as death by freak accident. The shooter gets a minor charge for his recklessness. A lot of the really surprising ones were mentioned, but the one I keep going back to is the Sherry Papini case. Her husband reports her missing, finds her iPhone using the Find My Phone feature, and deduces she's been abducted. The police embark on a manhunt, and the family gets money via a GoFundMe to find this lady. She shows up right around Thanksgiving, just a few weeks after she left, saying she'd been branded and abused by 2 inverse-looking Latina gangsters. Internet sleuths find evidence she and her husband are white supremacists, and there's evidence that one of the guys offering help to find Sherry is a con artist. Family insists she was kidnapped, but no proof is ever shown. Male DNA is found on her, and there's evidence she met a male doctor on her escapade, but the DNA isn't his. The family goes off the grid after this fiasco, and we are no closer to answers. It's a trip.